So there's two types of light language. There's something that could be technically called glossolalia, which is an unknown language on Earth, but it is, it's channeled through. And then there's xenoglossia, which is a known language on Earth, but the channel doesn't know the language, and so that channels through.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I have a special guest today. I have Jamye Price. You've probably heard of her. Jamye Price is the author of Opening to Light Languages, and the Cosmic Consciousness Ascension Deck is an energy healer, channel, and teacher. For over 2 decades, she has been teaching the path of empowerment as humanity moves through the natural process of ascension, an ever increasing conscious connection with the subtle realms. She developed a profound healing modality, Crystalline Soul Healing, with her Lyran Guides. It is a powerful alchemical template of soul progression that heals and empowers, bridging the inherent wisdom of the human and higher self. In addition, Jamye channels healing energies in the form of light language, which are transformational creation codes that further align you with your soul. She teaches both of these modalities worldwide. Her grounded and esoteric teaching brings clear understanding and personal empowerment. She offers unique and transformative classes for personal healing, light language downloads, and healing light language deck and book. And she teaches modalities that open healing capabilities and an understanding of our inherent divinity. We can always find more information at jamieprice.com. Welcome to the Reality Revolution, Jamye. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So, just for people that maybe don't know about you, tell us your origin story and how you got into this.
Yeah. So I always like to start with the fact that I was not a psychic child, just so we, recognize that there's so many different paths to our evolution. And for me, I started having rare psychic flashes in about 1987 and 1987. So I was about 17 at the time. And the they would be something that would be proven within a short period of time, but it wasn't something that I could control. And that went on for a few years and would sometimes be a little more frequent and things like that. But I had some different waves of my psychic senses and my sensitivity opening and kind of a natural healing process where I recognized my empathy. I recognized that when my guides were talking to me and teaching me. And so all of that was kind of in a vacuum for me because I didn't have any kind of context for it. But once I experienced healing myself, which just began with an impulse one morning when I woke up sick, by this time I was having odd experiences of having my guides talk to me, but not fully understanding exactly what it was. But I was like seeing auras, my psychic senses were coming online, but it was just occasional. Well, I woke up sick one morning and I just had this impulse to run my hand about an inch or so above my body, and it would get hot. And I would see like this gray energy leaving my body at certain points, and then I would just empty my hand for some reason. So I kind of drifted off after doing that for a little bit, and then I woke back up, and I was feeling totally fine. So I started doing that on friends and family just stealthily because I had no idea if it really worked, but I would just imagine that same thing with them if they were feeling bad, and they would always feel better. I would always feel better. And sometimes I would do that with different imagery scenario, like seeing a light, laser light kind of go through the body, cleaning everything. And so a lot of this began as just psychic impressions that were sometimes confusing to me, or I was like, wow, that was a weird daydream. But then later, with the full context, I realized that I was getting these impulses and I was getting this information from my guide team. And then at some point along this journey, I heard the word ascension. I don't remember exactly. I think I read it somewhere. And by this point, I was already doing light language. I was already working on clients. I was developing crystalline soul healing. And once I heard that word ascension, I just completely lit up. And so my energy healing obsession became combined with an obsession with ascension, which to me is just our natural evolution into a more conscious connection with our subtle nature. So we start to honor our thoughts and emotions more because we know that that's how we communicate to the subtle realm directly. We understand our intentions more. We heal things so that we're not as unconscious about things and we're coming more from the conscious mind. So that began my journey of obsession with energy healing and our natural evolution.
Fascinating. So where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the South,
Ah, okay.
so I was not very familiar with psychic senses or anything like that. I think my only exposure to it, besides a book when I was a teenager about astral projection, and I tried so hard. I was like, I'm going to follow what they said in the book, but it was like a teenage book, it wasn't
Yeah.
real instructions. That didn't work. And that commercial of a man getting on a plane suddenly stops. They would talk about psychic senses. So I kind of had this impression that it was either something you had or something you didn't, or it was a vision or it was something huge. And it never felt like that to me until I started having those impulses where I would hear something in my head that was kind of like my own thought, and then that thought would come true. It would generally, the way that showed up in the beginning was so and so is going to be wherever I was going to be, where I was driving to. And it would be random. It would certainly not be something typical, like somebody I hadn't seen in years, or I would be in another state at going to some little class for something, and there the person would be. So they would get proven, but I was just kind of expecting more. And so it just took a little bit for that to unfold because in the South, I was not exposed to that.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever been tempted just to go and bet on the horses with the extra information that you get? Or, I mean, maybe it doesn't work that way, but
It has not worked that way for me, but I haven't tried. Um, I mean, I try it in other ways
mhm,
because ultimately what I find is that I'm on a teaching path. I'm on an evolution path. And
right.
therefore, if something's not for my highest good, the information's not going to come through. So, for example, I was frustrated in this experience that I was having, and I thought to myself, I'm just going to go do this right now, which would put me on a path of moving in a different direction. And I was storming, I mean, whatever, walking strongly through my house, like, I'm doing this. And I heard in my head, just wait from my guides. And they don't do that. They don't be like,
Uh-huh.
oh, you should do this or go do that. And that doesn't happen. And so I stopped in my tracks and I was like, just wait for what? And they were like, just wait. Like, how long? Wait for what? They would not tell me. And I get it. I understand now that I went through that process that they didn't tell me all of the information because I would have kept spinning my energy around it. Another example of that is I was working on this manifestation that I really wasn't that stressed about that I could tell. Just
Hmm.
was moving along and that was fine. And my guides came to me and out of the blue and they said, that's 2 years away. And once they did that, I've had what I call a spiritual tantrum. I'm like, what? I can't believe that. I literally cried. I was having a spiritual tantrum. I'm like, that's not fair. And as I cried it out, or after I cried it out, I just was like, duh, I'm fine right now. So I don't mind that that's 2 years away. I'll be so excited when it gets there. And as soon as I neutralized that, that was that. I felt fine, but it actually ended up manifesting within like a month or two.
Uh-huh.
And I went back to my guides and I was like, all right, what was that about? Were y'all manipulating me so that I would have that healing? What was that about? And they said, no, where your energy was, it truly was 2 years away. And once you did have that release, you compressed the time.
Wow.
So it makes sense to me that I'm on a need to know basis or things are occurring for my highest good, because that to me is what the core of our journey is really about. And that's what we're relearning is to let go of the unhealthy control and relax when that's appropriate because that changes your energy field. And then take action, be direct when that's appropriate because there's definitely times where it's like, it's time for my decision. Because otherwise, as my guides have said, if you don't make a decision, one will be made for you. However, that doesn't mean we're controlling and deciding everything. So my guides communicate with me in that way. And I wish I could just get lottery numbers. That would be much easier.
That would be much easier. So when you started hearing from your guides, when did you know that you were channeling Lyrans? Explain what happened, the process, the journey from your guides to the Lyrans.
Much later,
Yeah.
much later. Because when I first started, first I didn't recognize that they were communicating to me. And some of the ways that that would show up was like the impulse that I told you, like I've never been familiar with this, but all of a sudden I'm just going to start moving my hand above my, I didn't know what chakras were. I was
Hmm.
not familiar with that, but that impulse is one way that they communicate with us. But from my experience, that was me just like, I'm going to try this, even though it didn't come from anywhere that I could recognize. But another way that they would communicate is I would kind of zone out and then I would start having a daydream or I would drift off and then I would awake and I would still kind of be in that state where, for instance, I remember kind of zoning out and not even being aware of what's happening. And then I start becoming aware again. I wasn't asleep, but I'm hearing this conversation in my head about the healing properties of the color green. I'm like, at that time, I was like, that is so weird. Why was I thinking that? And I just let it go because I thought I was just zoned out, daydreaming, and having some weird thoughts.
Hmm.
And then over time and with some repetition and some different experiences with that, I started to recognize when they were communicating to me because it was coming from out of the blue. But at first, I didn't recognize that at all. And that went on for years, but that was in the mid to late 90s when all of that was, that next wave was happening. So that
Hmm.
was a much different density. And then it probably wasn't until somewhere in the early-ish 2000s that I actually had like a reading with somebody that does that. They tell you what your galactic heritage is. And a couple of like a day or two before that, I was just sitting in my house doing something. I was working on something. And in my mind, I heard this strong thought, I'm a Lyran. And I'm like, well, that's weird. You didn't hear much about the Lyrans back at that time. It was there, but you didn't hear much about it. And then I had that reading a couple of days later that was already scheduled. And that was the first thing she said. Oh, you're a Lyran. The other thing she said was they're template creators. And I didn't know what that meant. And so it was at that point that I was having this information, but I didn't have anything to do with it because my guides hadn't come forward and said, we are the Lyran Council of Time. That didn't happen until 2012. So it was the early 2000s where I was having that galactic understanding, but I didn't have anything attached to it. And in some ways, I kind of like that because I believe that all of our galactic heritage, it's part of our unique soul signature, but
Hmm.
we're here to be fully human, embodying that. And so it kind of made that Lyran heritage something that was in the background until it started having context for me. So it was a very long time frame, and I tend to have, although I resist at times for sure, but I tend to have trust with the things that I trust. Like when I know I'm communicating with my guides, I'm feeling that sense of there's safety in that relationship. There's meaning in the things that they're telling me. They're giving me the information that I need, even if it's not all of the information that I want. I learned that trust over time in that relationship. And then the defining of it comes over time as it really has context for me.
So when you learned you were a Lyran, what did that mean? What was it? Past incarnations? What sort of information did you get from that revelation?
Yeah. So that also, kind of unfolded through time. And I
Right.
only have minor flashes of memories from Lyran lifetimes.
What do you remember?
So, some of the things that I remember in the Lyran lifetimes is one, I remember having this sense of like being out of control, like not having any control over it, over things that were going on around us.
Hmm.
I had this sense of feeling responsibility and as if things were kind of getting torn apart, like on a relationship level, on a structure level, meaning like societal structures and things. And then I'll have some other flashes sometimes of things that feel more pleasant, like a sense of feeling nature, a sense, and it's different than this kind of nature, but there's some similarities to it, almost like the movie Avatar, where I have
Okay.
this sense of feeling very connected with the nature around me.
Hmm.
And so it's little flashes like that, flashes that aren't as they don't have as much storyline as I probably would like, but that's also kind of not part of my path. So
Hmm.
for me, it always comes back to what I definitely find frustrating sometimes, and sometimes I do complain to my guides, but my path is what my path is. And so sometimes I've spoken to them and been like, I need more psychic senses in this way, and I want more information about this. And they will usually do that teachery thing that they do, which is, the information that you need, the information that's helpful is what's going to come forward, the information that's ripe or the information that serves you. Now, I still think it's very valuable for us to keep asking those questions. One, because we have variances in our path. We have times where things change, where something that wasn't ripe is ripe at another time. And that's kind of how you discover some of the things that are part of your path. So for me, I get pieces of that past information, and sometimes I have more storyline than other times, but it all kind of blends into this context of how does it apply for me here now with the journey that I'm experiencing here on earth. And for me, that's very much the journey of a teacher, which means being the journey of a constant student. So it all kind of comes back to that.
Right. So what have you learned from them? What are the primary teachings that you can share with us from your guides in the Lyrans?
Yeah. So My the Lyran Council of Time that I channel, they gave
Hmm.
themselves the name Ariane, and they chose that name, although they could have been the Lyran Council of Time, because it has some meaning for what they do, what their path is here, why they came forward at this time, because they are very focused on our inner work so that we are using that energy to shift this time that we're in right now, so
Hmm.
that we're holding that energy for ourselves, which it's always about our individual journey, and feeding that into the collective because we're that as well. So they focus a lot around the mental and emotional and our intentional work. And that's why they chose that name, because Arion, they showed it to me spelled out Areon. Well, Eon, that makes sense. They're the Lyran Council of Time. But then they showed me with the AR, one, it represents air because they focus a lot on the energetics of what we're doing rather than some other valuable things that people could focus on, like certain galactic heritage or, very physical things for our ascension. So they focus a lot on the subtle, the mental, emotional, and intentional. And then also, argon is the element that we breathe in, and it's the one that doesn't immediately get changed by our body. So we breathe in argon and we breathe out that same stable argon element. And that means that we're breathing in argon that has been in that same form or that same consistency throughout time.
Uh-huh.
Now, maybe not forever, but that it's something that maintains this consistency, and so that helps them to, or that's part of how they thread for us that understanding of time. And they gave me the name Ariane and they showed it to me spelled out, Areon. And of
Hmm.
course, Eon, that makes sense, Eon. But the AR has to do with one air because they focus a lot on the subtle, our
Right.
mental, emotional, and intentional bodies. But also argon, it's the abbreviation for the element argon, and that is the one element that stays very stable as we breathe it in and exhale it. So, in essence, it's something that doesn't get changed by us from inhale to
Uh,
exhale. And they relate that to receiving information and emitting information. So, I thought that was interesting, but the thing that convinced me was when they first told me that name, I was like, what if people are like Aryan and they have different connotations for that? And they were like, no, that's the name. So they came back 2 weeks later and they said, now spell it backwards. And when you spell it backwards, it's Noera, no era or timelessness. And once they said that, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. That's totally the name. Of course, they knew that the whole time. But they focus a lot on helping us to really understand the blending of physicality or linearity and non-linearity. And they do that in a lot of different ways. So the one of the main ways that they do that is to help us to not let any kind of cognitive dissonance stay. Like if we say a cliche like, oh, time doesn't really exist or all time is now, it's not that those are wrong. It's that if we just say that without understanding the full reasons why,
hmm.
then we don't realize how unconscious we are about what we don't truly understand. And then implementation of linearity and nonlinearity, which is what we're doing with moving from third density to fourth density, that whole experience has a lot of unconsciousness within it. So, for example, they want us to understand why all time is now. What does that really mean? Well, we know we're in the present moment, and that's where we can touch things and do things. So that's where our linearity is, the full presence. Our past and our future is fully here right now because everything that we've experienced in the past, not only from this lifetime, but what's within our DNA of our ancestry, what's within the land that we live on, what's within our community structures, and on and on. All of that past is part of what we're experiencing right now. And so it's fully here in the present moment, but it's subtle. It's not something you can change, like we
Hmm.
could change something that I'm going to do right now. Same with the future, that is just pure potential. And so that pure potential is all here right now as well. And so when we start to logically understand layers and layers like that, then we're becoming more conscious with the linearity and the non-linearity. And we know that that subtle energy it's malleable. It's not as dense as the physical, so it can change very quickly. That's why something like healing work or doing forgiveness work or becoming aware of certain things, that's part of a healing process. It changes the past, not from it never happened, but here's my energy with it. Now it's this relaxed, malleable thing that instead of a distortion that I can't move through well, and now it's restricting me in my present moment, it becomes an openness of, oh, it's this support that I can easily move through. It's the wisdom of lesson learned.
Oh, okay.
It's those kinds of things.
Right. So you had mentioned that we're moving into fourth density. I'm super fascinated by all the different discussions of the new Earth and the different models, from third to fifth dimension and the fourth density. I'm a big fan of the Law of One. I'd love to get what you've learned and what your impressions of what is actually happening as we shift into the fourth density and what that fourth density world is like.
Yes, yes. So the way that my guides talk about it is if we look at this from a density perspective, that's kind of like a bandwidth of information. And if we talk about it from dimensions, then we're talking about it from an experiential perspective.
Okay.
So It's like density encompasses dimensional expression. So to move from third dimension to fifth dimension, to me, what that represents is moving from a focus or a perspective of third density, which is length, width, depth, essentially, and then the fourth would be time, which we're ultimately blending the time, the fourth and the fifth right now as we kind of go back and forth like a season changes.
Hmm.
So we move from that focus of it's the physical that matters. That's what's real, and everything else is not really real. It's just kind of happening, but it's not real. Well, that would be third density, third dimensional perspective, and that's very third density.
Hmm.
As we move into fourth density, we move into fourth dimensional expression and fifth dimensional expression, which are like the beginning bridge into fourth density, where we start to understand time, for example, like I just explained, and there's much more that could be explained about that, and the connection of things, more of the subtlety. But then where fifth dimensional expression is, from my perspective, is that's where things are fully connected, where we have the fuller understanding of the connection bridged through the experience of separation. We're still in fourth density at the beginning phases of it. We will still be having an experience of separation, and then we'll keep having more and more experience of connection happening where things will start opening up, where it will be easier, for example, to communicate telepathically, to have more of the intuitive senses occurring, to have more of the understanding of the connection that we truly are. And these are concepts that those of us on this path already understand, but we have to keep applying it in and applying it in. And essentially, also not waiting, that's a bad way to describe it, but holding that while the collective is catching up in their experience as well. So to me, that fourth density is still in separate bodies because we'll bridge into the beginning bandwidth of fourth density. It will still be separate bodies, separate experiences with more and more layering of the experience of the connection as well.
How long, or what is your guess? Will we be at the end point of third density into fourth density when we're fully into fourth density and the collective is fully into the fourth density? How long do you think it'll take?
So it's a long season, and I feel like by there's going to be times where it starts to become much more obvious that you're experiencing a different season. You know, you're experiencing a different density. So I feel like it's layers of some are going to be having this experience, some are going to be having a separate experience.
Mhm.
But overall, it feels like the beginnings of it to where there's kind of a critical mass of us that are feeling like this is the way that it is, feels like it's about a 30-year time frame from
Mhm.
now, you know, maybe not 30 to the day, but
Right.
somewhere around 30 years. Like from 1987, which was the harmonic convergence, which I didn't know anything about, but that was when my psychic senses started opening. So as looking
Mhm.
back at that, I'm like, oh, I can see that beginning phase. And they were much less profound at that time. Well, then we had 2012, and you know, we've kind of moved to that next phase. We're moving through that next phase of 2012 kind of being a point of no return, but not a final point.
Mhm.
And so I feel like these next about 20 something to 30 years are going to be that season going back and forth where there's more and more people that are like, I just can't deny this anymore. And it keeps building that critical mass to where more of us are starting to feel that consistency of this is what it is. And, you know, I think that's going to definitely have separate experiences, which is why I think some people frame it from it's a split because dimensionally it is. And, we have experiences like this all the time, just kind of like I was talking about, I was zoned out and now I'm like, oh, I'm back to what was just happening there? Why was I thinking that?
Yeah.
I was holding that different vibration for a period of time that was so intense that I couldn't even hold the conscious mind. And as we do that more consistently, the blending will feel much more natural, but until then, it's going to be in and out.
Well, it feels like we're going through a rocky period. And so when people look at what's happening in the world, politics and wars, it feels like we're encountering even more separation. This is not what we imagined the shift would be. There's greater dissension, greater hate, and so there's a part of me that says, is the lashing of the tail as the animal dies, or and I have people in my group, and I'm sure that you've encountered this that are saying, "Oh, this is great! All these things that are happening. It's a sign that that." And I feel like I'm in a different world. Like I see the world differently than everyone else. There's this like this split that you're talking about. So I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, yeah. So, one, yes, it is part of that lashing of the tail, or the way that Ariane, the Lyran Council of Time, explains it is the spiral, because we live in a spiral galaxy. So, the
Right.
spiral is at the core of our form. So when that spiral is tightening, which is how they explain it, like the hourglass spiral. So
Hmm.
when the spiral is tightening, just like a centrifuge, you can't resist that flow as much because it's spinning faster. And so the things that aren't meant to be, you trying to force them, it gets harder to push against that natural flow.
Hmm.
But what that also does, well, one, that's also the time to go more inward, because that's when you know that the the inner realm is far more malleable than the external. It's more time to focus on that. That doesn't mean don't take action, because we're in a longer phase of this, but just be aware that the inner is becoming far more potent for us. Then the other side of that is the other thing that centrifuge flow does. What a centrifuge does is it strengthens strong bonds, love, consciousness, things like that. But it also breaks apart weak bonds and separates them. So the dross rises essentially. So the things that are weak bonds pull, those are splattering off. And that's what it feels like. So that to me is the lashing of the tail. It's the splattering of the BS that just is not going to be able to sustain. And so they're grasping for, well, then we need more control. That's that human reaction to
Hmm.
an unbalanced ego, is the only solution then is more control. So we see that going on in the world around us, that stuff is surfacing and the crap is flying out.
Hmm.
And, the flow of that continuing, that hourglass continuing, once it meets that opposite flow, that's the implosion explosion. It's the place where the one direction meets the other direction, but it's also the place of neutrality, the 0 point, the event horizon. And at that point that we would see as one little point or one little line,
Hmm.
it's actually three-dimensional, fourth dimensional, multi-dimensional, where that's when all time meets. So it's that neutrality that is at the core of that. And when we're in that state, all of this stuff that's going on around us becomes much easier to flow with, because we're not trying to hold on to what's trying to splatter away. We're not trying to control, and we're not avoiding things either, because we're in that open state of, I'm strong enough to receive. That's what the subatomic model does with the proton, neutron, and electron. It's that neutron that, when that's balanced with the positively charged proton, that's when you have stable change. And that opposite of the electron can then bond to create new form. So for us, that's the metaphor of, I'm so neutral, I'm open to the positive and the negative, because I know that everything just flows right on through. This is a bigger process than me that is occurring. So
Right.
it's it's a layered process that has a lot of splattering and releasing, purging
Mhm.
of the things that restrict us from that open neutrality and that assertion of our energy as that's appropriate.
Do we reach a point where we transcend institutions and governments and that stuff doesn't matter anymore? Do we reach a level of awareness or power or control where we collectively don't need governments or, nations? How do you envision it?
So the way that they've shown it to me is hierarchical structures have a value when they serve the whole. So truly, rather than most power, no power, or better and less than, paid a fair wage, not paid a fair wage, all of those ways that we could say that as we start to feel more of that connection and really live that experience, which we will have to create ourselves, it's not just going to be created by governments, that they the flow and that response will start to respond to how we are living. So the hierarchical structures will have less of this and more of these bandwidths that work together. So they've showed the way that they've showed it to me is that we will still stay in physical form and having some value of overarching um, governance is the wrong way. Leadership is the better word because we
Mhm.
don't have leadership, we have governorship. And so those kinds of things will start to shift in order to have more of that, to have more of a resonance with what we're actually holding them to.
Okay.
All of that starts in the subtle first, and then it manifests in the physical because then the actions are inspired from that. And this again kind of circles back to knowing your path, which does not mean you know all the answers and you know exactly what it is, but knowing your inner path so that when you are pulled to something, when you find what your passion is, because it's different than everyone else's in at least nuanced ways, that the inspired action of how to implement that comes from you. Where does it start for you? Is it something that's going on in a business? Is it something that's going on in government? Is it something that's going on in your family? That those unique ways of application for each individual come, but that those systems will start to shift because they can't sustain the way that they've been. And this time of uncovering a lot of information as that centrifuge is spinning off the dross, we will say nicely, um, that it can get disturbing. And that's something that is another important one for people to recognize what they need in their life is how much information do you need? What information is actually helpful for you? And then what starts to affect unconscious things that you expect in the overall, like, oh my gosh, that's so big. This is so huge. How can we overcome it? That
Mhm.
when you start noticing that hopelessness, for lack of a better word, which could be a variance of energy, or that frustration being far more dominant or sustaining than the hopefulness, that's a time to reassess and know that you're toxifying your system rather than informing your system because you are meant to receive energy. We are receivers of information. We are a connected collective. And as we really honor that and determine what we're going to ingest and then utilize that for our benefit, change that inside of our energy, then emit that out, which we're doing constantly. That's when we start pulling information in that's valuable to us, whether it's pleasant or not, but not more than we need, and then emitting out information that can truly change things because it's not all contorted with frustration and fear
Mhm.
and overwhelm.
What role does technology play in the shift?
So that's an interesting one. So this is not one that I ask a lot about,
Hmm.
but because they give me this overall that they have given me since they've been communicating through me is we are the biotechnology. We are the technology that we need. Now, that doesn't mean we don't benefit from technology. We're meant to utilize that. That's part of our creativity, but that it is meant to stay in a way that really serves us. And that is one that I wonder, and they have not given me a definitive answer of how it will go. But some of the things that I'm seeing, how that technology will get misused because we are the gold. And
Hmm.
it has been it's less about our physical labor, and it's going to continue to be less about our physical labor, which is where it used to be for humanity. And it's more about our mental. And that's what has been happening a lot with our technology is it's skewing our mental and emotional stability. And that's what's most dangerous because that's what we need in order to move to this next level. Because the next level is all about the subtle. It's not still going to have the physical, but we're understanding that better. It's the subtle. And so, how we're thinking and feeling and intending, that's the true gold right now. And that's where the battle, quote unquote, is. It's the battle of the mind.
So we talked about light language at the beginning. Explain what that is and how do you utilize light language?
Yeah. So, light language is just a form of multidimensional communication. And we all have multidimensional communication. So, if I have body language, you're reading and you're assuming you know what this means. Is
Hmm.
she annoyed and holding back, or is she cold? You don't really know. You have to kind of intuit some of that.
Right.
So light language is a multidimensional language, whether that's spoken or sung, or you can write it, you can sign it through the body, the whole body.
Hmm.
And it sometimes is coming in multiple forms and flowing in ways that are not always audible and visible, but it is multidimensional communication. Language is information, and light is a carrier wave of externalization, externalized information.
Hmm.
So it's a natural thing to all of us. We all have the capability to understand it or to emit it. That doesn't mean we all will in this lifetime. We don't have to. There's plenty of other multidimensional communications, but it is just a natural form of communicating. And some call it speaking in tongues, for example, but that would be like a westernized religious context. And there's words for it all around the world. It's in ancient documents, noted all over the place. So it's very natural to us. And because we go into that multidimensional state of expression, we are in a broader form of communication rather than memorized and contextualized words. So it doesn't use the same part of the brain as our language center does. It uses more of the limbic system, which is a little broader, emotional, subconscious um, type of communication. And so it's opening us to that broader flow of communicating. And when we tap into a broader flow, we are tapping into core values of life, which would be improvement, evolution, love, resolution, healing. So I find it very healing in general. And it also can communicate very directly if you can get the translation for it. And then some things are too broad to translate anyway. They're just not as linear.
And how do you use it? How do you apply it? What kind of sort of effect can it have?
So it can have the effect of healing. It can work just like any other modality, like crystalline
Hmm.
soul healing, but that one's silent. There's no movement to it. So it works in the energy field because it's multi-dimensional, it's subtle. There's a vast amount of information that's flowing, even though we'll hear or see part of it. So it's very healing. You can release the past, you can activate things for the future, you can learn things, it's helps to resolve blocks and things like that. So I was introduced to it by my guides. It just started happening to me. I was introduced to it through a healing context. So I was already working on clients, and they would lay there on the massage table with their eyes closed while I was doing whatever, my guides were showing me. And I was just running energy at the time and building the Crystalline Soul Healing template. So it was first coming through my hands, and that was
Hmm.
awesome because their eyes were closed, and I'm like, whoa, I'm not even moving my hands. This is so cool. And it started as small twitches, and then it grew into, this big hand dance over the person. Then when the sound wanted to start coming out, that took a long time for me
Hmm.
to adjust to that because that just felt too weird. And, eventually I got over that, but I just accepted that I'm weird. Weird's the new normal, I think.
Where's the new normal? Well, I would love it if you could share your light language, and for all the people listening, healing, whatever intention it has, we would love to experience light language from you.
Great, great. So, just to kind of talk people through what to expect, you'll see me, my hands moving, you'll hear the light language. But notice whatever's occurring for you because your higher self is what's deciding what will release or activate for you. I'm not doing anything to you. So
Mhm.
just see what you notice. Anything physical in your body, any thoughts or emotions that arise, or any kind of psychic impressions. And of course, it's fine if you don't notice anything. And we will see what comes through because I'm just going to allow whatever's for the highest good.
All right.
Mniarat kawarat is san prohata su sumshay pro korot amat tan hormet or at sunj kormat bro ratat im san sharak uk braurat dal hrnutot such ukurut eot o bra to tem at atiem mohrktendet eot such daurat in naurat akrail hrnum atsu Sam shukur im pro to hortat im yam urmnat akrayalat o sancharuk urmat nim atsucharut o krendhatiat urumat uram hertant bahrutam o sachat tutum sam chokrortant brahatiat anat san janut akrat num hat ur tel ernedet im brahtat I sund kram cha krent. Gaura stam waratat im brar harkror tamad el don hardan sanchurum dat eret kra hataktan or bran hatien en suchurt okurt in bertet I grand. Gaura kam pror grand pran hentiarut samjol krot and der sut and Jamorabdan hortendiar u gra haptan orm daur hatat inan such rumdar al renondot sakro grand hatianand. So our hat o sha orm haut o dam horabdan hat I satrand orm dar o kort unka braur hammer jandot sacharat and gral harndat im sum chand. sum chamor dandat I grandat and lor. Miraton su sham daurat. You heard o suncharatam. Krotat and orunta. Emor dama. Good. Good. Interesting.
Share with us what's going on with you when the light language comes through you. What's your consciousness like?
Yeah. So, especially when I'm doing something like this, so I'm working on a group essentially that at different time frames will be interacting with the energies, but I can feel that group, not in the sense like, oh, I see your face and your face, but in the sense that I feel the intensity of what feels different than working on one person and the things that are clearing or activating what's going on as that's occurring. So some of this will apply to certain people, and some of it will not apply to certain people. But there was an overall experience of one, a lot of release happening all around the head in the beginning, and then the sense of strengthening the heart. And that went on for a while and in different phases. So for a while, there was a lot of release happening and things that felt very connected into this life, like the earth experience. There was a time where the throat started becoming part of that heart strengthening, and I could feel almost like a block of not expressing the self coming off. And so it was letting the heart express through the throat chakra, which sometimes means the
Mm.
things we say, and sometimes it's the things we do. So that became very entwined, but that was about release so that we would express. Then the that heart strengthening was very focused with the lower chakras, and that, especially that third chakra in the beginning, that was about being able to really embody that heart energy here and to really have that clarity of those lower chakras so that we're able to anchor that energy here. There was also a time where there was a lot with the second chakra that was clearing out in order to embody that. Then things started shifting a little, and that heart was still in that strengthening mode, but then there was a lot that was releasing all around the head. And I felt like very specific things were opening up in the head, a lot going on to release from the subconscious, so old trauma and things like that. And then there was another wave of clearing the throat chakra, but this had to do with letting go of misinformation that we had received. So basically things that we had swallowed. And so that was kind of bringing full circle. And then after that, like expression and receiving. But after that, the heart was feeling much lighter, and I was seeing this broader energy field all around the heart, because that's the core of what this is all about, getting a unified energy field so that our intention has more of that electromagnetic power. So that was what I was
Mhm.
experiencing. And then, their higher selves are doing it. So you might have a completely different experience for you. Like, oh, there was my childhood. Oh, there is one other thing that came up. Um, so the energy is somewhat connected into the things that we were stirring up as we were talking.
Right.
And part of what happened, this was connected to the throat. I can't remember if it was the receiving or more when it was the expression, but in order to clear up our perceptions and to be able to feel with the heart, experience with the heart, and then manifest that, part of what we're doing is re-perceiving the things that are going on. So whatever's in our life, whether that's something that's actually happening to us or from us, or it's something that's in the collective that we're aware of, that we are taking that information in, we're transforming it, we're holding that space of love, we're holding those new potentials so that we don't experience, this is all bad, that we're like, oh, I don't like this, and I might even have these emotions with it, but I'm going to hold both perspectives. Anything that's happening that I feel is negative, there's a positive potential there. And I may not have all the information of what's truly negative, quote unquote, or positive. So really opening that perception so that the mind, the heart, and the expression are all in tune with that neutrality.
Yeah, I could really feel the throat chakra, something going on with the throat chakra as I was listening and watching. And I really love everybody to share in the comments what your own personal experience is. I think it's interesting. What the scientist in me wants to know. Have you ever gone back and tried to see if there were any words from a different language or any of the words that you were speaking? Because some of it sounded familiar to me, and I was, wait, I've heard that, but no, where is that coming from? Have you heard that before? Somebody saying that sounds familiar?
So there's two types of light language. There's something that could be technically called glossolalia, which is an unknown language on Earth, but it is, it's channeled through. And then there's xenoglossia, which is a known language on Earth, but the channel doesn't know the language, and so that channels through.
Hmm.
So there have been a couple of times, and obviously with xenoglossia, you have to have some way of proving it. And so you have to have either someone that speaks the language or a way to discover what that means. So there have been a couple of times where people have said to me, "You said this phrase." One was in Hebrew and one was in Japanese. And it has to be more than one word. Like we have words that
Right.
it's same thing in another language, same word, but it means something totally different. So it has to at least be enough that like, whoa, yeah, that was different. And then there's been times, and especially I've seen this with my soul sister does this a lot. She also speaks light language, and she'll get a word, it'll repeat, it'll keep coming through. And so she'll look it up and, try to phonetically spell it. And then
Hmm.
she'll come across something that totally makes sense with the whole theme of the healing. So it's not about forcing something to work and fit in your definition, but just keep that open mind and look for it. And then I notice words that repeat that I know. Like sometimes I speak a lot of ancient Egyptian dialects. And so I'll have words that come through that are, I'll recognize like chem or chemet and things like that. And sometimes it'll even be a very specific name. Like I say Ptah a lot, but not like, oh, I'm talking about the God, more the meaning of that, because they developed that based on an aspect of life, which to me represents the breath of life, similar to Brahma, Vishnu. Yes, same thing with
Right.
like the breath of life, the core.
Super fascinating. Very interesting. Jamie, you're offering classes in March, so you wanted to let people know they can go on your website at jamieprice.com. I'll have a link in the description. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so I love teaching healers to work with a modality. I teach light language, so we go through in depth. We practice with all of the different forms: speaking, writing, singing, signing,
Hmm.
and then we go through those together and go through exercises. So that's something that's a lot of fun. So if it's that class is for beginners and intermediates, it's not for advanced practitioners. So if it has not started for you at all, but you feel that draw to it, or if it's just started opening up, that's a great class to go through with the community. And then I also teach Crystalline Soul Healing online. That is a Lyran modality that my guides worked on with me. And it's silent, there's no movement, so it's very different than light language. But it's a template, it's an alchemical template, which is like a vast set of instructions that gets initiated into the field of the practitioner. And then as they're working on healing, the template is running almost like a computer program would scan for things. Does this apply? Yes, it changes like this because that's what the higher self decides. And then no, skip it. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply now, but it applies later. So crystalline soul healing is a Lyran technique of working with universal law, but the formula of universal law. So it's fascinating to go through all of
Yeah,
those instruction sets.
super fascinating. Jamie, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your light language. And it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you. Keep on doing what you're doing. And welcome to the Reality Revolution.
Thank you, Brian. It has been quite a pleasure, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Thanks.
We return you now to your local announcer.